But there's one factor that I think is the biggest factor for me. If you've got more modern apartments, service charges can be literally hundreds of pounds every single month. If you're using them as single lets, it's difficult to make houses stack up. Having been investing for 30 years, investing in both apartments and houses, that I have personally experienced much better long-term capital growth from my... Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Property Magic Podcast. And I'm going to answer a question that I'm asked all the time by property investors. And that is it better to buy houses or should I be buying apartments? And to be honest, I have both. There are pros and cons of both, but I do have a favorite and I'll share with you why I have a favorite. So let's talk about the different opportunities. Many property investors like to buy apartments, and there's some very valid reasons for buying apartments. The first one is that tenants like to live in apartments. They're nice and easy, they're low maintenance, they don't have a garden they have to look after, and they can be quite cost effective, probably lower cost than a house would be as well. So that can work really well for many tenants, which is why investors like them. One of the biggest problems with buying an apartment you want to rent out is normally there's going to be some sort of service charge that you as the landlord have to pay. That means that's going to cut down the amount of cash flow you can make from your apartment. Whereas if you have a freehold property, there are no service charges. Obviously, you've got to do the maintenance, look after the property as you have to look after your flat, but that's one of the benefits of doing freehold houses because you don't have service charges. Now, another reason why people like to buy apartments is generally they are lower investment than it is to buy a house, which is typically more expensive. And I can understand if people have a limited amount of funds, they might want to buy apartments or even a couple of apartments that might seem better value than buying houses. However, what you need to understand is normally apartments are actually smaller than houses. And if you look at the cost per square foot on an apartment, well, actually you're often paying a premium. Whereas if you buy a second-hand property, you can probably buy that at a lower price. You can spend some money on that apartment and add value to it. You can often extend houses, going up into the attic or do rear extensions. There's very little you can do to an apartment apart from decorating it to increase the appeal for your tenants wanting to live there. But there's one factor that I think is the biggest factor for me. Given that I like to invest for the long term, and as you know, the 5 golden rules of property investing, golden rule number 4 is we hold property for the long term. Now, I bought apartments and I bought houses over the years, and I can categorically state from my personal experience, having been investing for 30 years, investing in both apartments and houses, that I have personally experienced much better long-term capital growth from my houses rather than my apartments. And I think that's for a few reasons. First of all, when you buy an apartment, as I said earlier, you are paying a slightly higher cost per square foot, and you're often buying at a premium. Now, even if you're buying at an alleged discount, and I bought a number of properties that allegedly were discounted off the true market value, you're still paying a premium for that apartment. And what that means is if you park the money, your deposit into that property, because you can't really add value to that property, you have to sit back and wait for the long-term capital growth. Now, I have had that in some apartments it's not been so good. Whereas with a house, obviously you can buy probably at a more cost-effective rate. You're not paying quite as much cost per square foot. Although the property might be bigger and so more expensive, you have much more potential to add value to increase the value quicker than the normal capital growth. In fact, you can often buy at a discount, add value through refurbishment, refinance, and you've got no money left in, and then benefit from the long-term capital growth. So if I was to start again, I probably would only buy houses and not buy apartments. Now, there is an exception to that rule. If you live in London, most of the properties are apartments and houses are very expensive. So this is kind of a bit of a guidance rule. If you're investing anywhere outside of our capital city, generally, I believe houses are better. Now, you might say, yeah, but houses are more expensive, Simon. How can that work better? If you're using them as single lets, it's difficult to make houses stack up. However, If you use some of the more advanced strategies, such as houses of multiple occupation, where you're renting individual rooms on single contracts, or you're doing serviced accommodation, which is short-term rental, you can get much higher rental income from those properties. It's worth saying, of course, you can use apartments for serviced accommodation. They can work particularly well. And also, if it's a larger apartment, you can actually use it as an HMO as well. So I'm not saying you can't use those strategies with apartments, but I just think if you're looking for the long-term capital growth in addition to the rental income, then you can't really go wrong buying houses. Something I see people talk about all the time, which kind of frustrates me. There are property educators out there who say you should buy off-plan property, and off-plan is normally you buy it before it's built. The idea is there's going to be some capital appreciation between when you put down your deposit and actually buy the property. And whilst in theory that is correct, however, in the current property market, we're not seeing a lot of growth. In fact, some people are worried about having a potential property market crash. So why on earth would you want to buy something that you have to wait? And actually, if you have a long build period, which might be 6 months, a year, or even 2 years, that's deposit money tied up. You get no return on it at all. And people say, oh yes, but I'm going to get the capital growth. Well, you may or you may not get that. So personally, I think new build off-plan properties, whether they're houses or apartments, is probably not a good strategy to use in the current property market. It's much better to find older properties, older stock. You can get them at a much better price. Now, as I've said, although houses are my preference, there are some times when we might get apartments because maybe they have short leases. And it's one of the other problems with a leasehold apartment is when you buy the apartment, you're actually only buying it for a period of time. Now, usually it's 100 years, 150 years, so more than your lifetime. But as a property lease goes down in terms of the years left decrease, the value of that property also goes down. So such that if you've got less than 80 years on a lease, it's very difficult to get a mortgage. Now, of course, you can pay the freeholder to extend the lease. And there's an opportunity here because very often people have a property, it's got a short lease, which is difficult to mortgage. That means they can only attract cash buyers. Now, and maybe the owner doesn't have the money to extend the lease themselves. They think, I'm just going to sell this property and get rid of it. So not many people are attracted to those properties because they're often advertised as cash buyers only. And whilst there are some cash buyers in the market, most of us, we like to use mortgages where possible to make the most of the money we have as our deposits and spread it amongst a number of properties rather than tying it up in just 1 or 2 properties. So if a property is advertised as cash buyers only, one of the reasons could be because it's got a short lease. There's an opportunity to secure those properties, to extend the lease. And once the lease is extended, we can then get a normal mortgage on it. So the way we'd do that, we'd secure it with a purchase option, we'd extend the lease, and then we buy the property, at which point we can get a normal mortgage so we don't have to put a big amount of cash into it. Or we can flip it on and sell it to someone else and just benefit in the gain in the property value. Now that's something that most property owners don't do because maybe they just don't know, they don't have the funds, and they haven't educated themselves on how to be a successful property investor. But short leases can be a great strategy, but just please bear in mind, look out for that service charge. If you've got more modern apartments, service charge can be literally hundreds of pounds every single month because maybe you're paying for a fancy concierge, a gym that hardly anyone uses, maybe even a swimming pool, maintenance for the grounds. These all add up and can make apartments a very, very expensive option when you take the service charge into account. So for these reasons, hopefully you agree with me that actually houses can make a much better investment when you're looking what kind of property should you buy. Of course, there's always exceptions, but that's my general principle. So I do hope that's been useful for you. If you've liked this video, please like the video, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure you hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified anytime a video comes out. And comment below, do you prefer to buy houses or do you prefer to buy apartments?